Hi, everybody. So today we are talking about migration settlers. So our essential question for today is what motivated movement to the West and what were the effects of that movement? So our focus today, we've passed these different acts to build the railroad. Yesterday we talked about the Indian Wars, and so now we've eliminated the Native American problem. So what is life like for those settlers that chose to move out west? But we're going to explore like their reasons for moving out west as well as their experience once they got out there. These are the standards for today. Again, you can take the time to go and read those on your own. So what motivates people to move? So think about that question as we are going through this lesson. So what motivates people to move? And you can think about, even in today's world in 2020, what makes people decide they want to move from one place to the next, whether it's you're just moving from one house in the same city to another house. Maybe you're moving from one city to a different, maybe one side of the country to another, but you can even go even wider than that and think about immigrants that move from one country to the other. And so that motivation for why people move. Then we also want to think about what hardships and opportunities those immigrants or migrants face. So immigrants are going to be coming from outside of the country into a new country. Migrants are just migrating from one area to the next. So that's why today's notes are called migration settlers, because these people are migrating from one part of America to the next and not coming from outside of America in. They would be called immigrants. So we're exploring all of those things. You can even think about this same question looking at today's world. What type of opportunities, but also what kind of struggles do immigrants and migrants face when they move from one area to the next? Okay, so this is just a video that discusses some of the experience of some of these settlers and the westward expansion. You can play that at your own leisure as you're going through the PowerPoint for today. So a quick recap, like I just said, the Transcontinental Railroad. The Pacific Railway Act was passed in 1862. This brought a beginning to the plans and construction of the railroad. It is finalized when the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads meet at Promontory Point or Promontory Summit, Utah in 1869. The Homestead Act is passed in May of 1862, so a little bit before the Pacific Railway Act. And remember, we talked about the fact that the government needed to give people a motivation to get out there, then a means to get out to the West. Okay, and so the Homestead Act promised 160 acres of free land to anyone willing to live for 5 years and improve on the land. And improve on the land means farming, building up towns, populating this area, so on and so forth. Yesterday, we talked about the Indian Wars, and this was these series of conflicts because remember, way back when the government passed the Indian Removal Act, which led to the Trail of Tears. So the Indian Removal Act moved all those Native Americans from the southeast area, because then the settlers came and wanted that, move them west of the Mississippi River, which is now this area that they want to have access to build this railroad and to settle. And so because of the violation of a lot of treaties and agreements that the U.S. government came to with the Native Americans, there were these fights and battles over land as well as resources. So that Indian Wars period ended with a loss for the Native Americans, but they did see some successes, like with the Battle of Little Bighorn. So problems on the homestead, a lot of issues. We talked about this when we talked about the Great Plains area. So even though it was good for farming because it was flat, this land was not suited for crops many had been used to planting. So the terrain is very different in this Great Plains area and further out west than it is on the East Coast. Droughts, blizzards, and extreme weather. The wind drove people crazy. Loneliness. The only families that were there, the only people that you could talk to were your immediate family, because the other families are miles and miles away. 160 acres is a lot of land. So your neighbor isn't just right beside you. Insects are a huge problem as well. Claim jumpers. These are people who were trying to steal claims to land, and they were illegally occupying other people's property because you can't really tell whose property is whose. And so you have people who are saying, oh, this is my land, and it's really not. Poor housing led to disease and even sometimes death. Education, religion, and medicine were done by the family members. So there's no schools, there's no local churches, like there's no communal areas, hospitals, anything like that. Banks, railroads, and companies blocked water sources and forced homesteaders off their land in many times. So it wasn't just this easy, wonderful, like, oh, cool, we got all this land. We're going to build a pool over there and a house over here and another house over here. It was difficult and very lonely. There were some inventions that came about during this era to help the homesteaders with some of these problems. So we have the steel plow. Was invented to break up the hard soil because they get a lot of droughts, so the soil isn't as moist. It rains a lot here in North Carolina, and so our soil is a lot softer and more moist and easier to kind of plow. Well, the steel plow was invented to help with that problem in the Great Plains area and further out west. Barbed wire. This allowed farmers to protect their land from animals and other farmers. We're going to talk about how barbed wire is like a good and bad thing. Reapers. They were used to harvest crops and speed up the process. So we have an increase in mechanization, an increase in machinery and technology. Even though this doesn't look like the technology we're used to, it's still considered technology. Then we have here windmills. They were used to help pump water for irrigation and for drinking purposes. So to make things a lot safer and to just move along a lot quicker. Okay. All right, so we've got the land. So they've got the land. They've got the railroad is built. They've got their land. Now what? So we're going to explore some of the different groups that moved out west, their motivation for moving, and then what their experience was like once they arrived there. So first, the cowboys. They helped with the cattle drive. The vaqueros are Mexican cowboys. They went to California, and then other cowboys first appeared in Texas. So there's two different types of cowboys, but they helped with the cattle drive because at the time, you just got free roaming animals out there. And so remember we talked about the fact that the Transcontinental Railroad was also bringing resources back and forth. That's a resource that can be taken, that those cattle, once you drive them up, kill them, use them for the meat and the different things, and take that out back to the East Coast. Their experience, it was difficult, long, boring, and very lonely journeys. They were drinking and gambling a lot because when people are bored, they need to find things to occupy their time. And a lot of times when they're bored, they don't have television, Netflix, and the internet and the computer like we have today. So they don't always find productive ways to occupy their time. Farming and the barbed wire fence brought it into open range farming. So the cowboys were really good with the cattle drive, but with that barbed wire, the fence, and let's just take a look at the picture. So with the barbed wire fence, you can't get through that. It's got all the steel barbs and everything in it, and so you can't get through that very easily. So that brought an end to this open range farming, and it also hurt the cowboys because they were no longer needed as much. The 49ers. This is the nickname for the individuals that came to California to become rich after gold was discovered there. So they were the miners. Their whole purpose for going out west was gold. So their experience when getting out west, mining and searching for gold, one of those things with mining and searching for gold is that it's a gamble. It is not a guarantee. Okay, some people go out there, they think, oh, I'm going to strike it rich, and then they find nothing. Okay, there was great competition among miners because it's a limited resource. Work was hard and wasn't always worth the profit, so the reward wasn't always equal to the work that you were putting in. They had their own laws and ways of governing themselves, though. Now we've got Mormons. So they wanted to spread their faith and escape persecution. So persecution is a term that just means you are being treated unfairly to some extent because of a belief, a characteristic that you have, anything like that. So you were being treated unfairly and singled out because of it. Well, their experience, they developed this dry farming technique. Their hard work turned the desert into a thriving community. They attempted statehood, but they were denied due to new persecution for practicing polygamy, which is where men have more than one wife. And so people didn't like that. So they were ostracized and persecuted against and treated unfairly again, even though that's the reason that they were coming, or one of the reasons they moved out west. Railroad owners. So they wanted to control the railroad industry, and connect the East and the West. And so their experience, they made millions, but a lot of the time they were exploiting their workers by paying them very, very low and unfair wages. Women. Okay, women settled for land and opportunity just like men, but they wanted independence from men. Their experience, lonely and very difficult life, a lot of starvation, which also we have disease. They played a large part in making these settlements permanent, though, and they were far outnumbered by men. So not horrible experience, but not the best either. Exodusters. So this is the nickname given to recently free African Americans and fugitive slaves. So a lot of slaves were trying to escape and they would go out west. And so their nickname was Exodusters. They wanted to find a place to live freely and to organize political groups to fight for better rights and opportunities. And they also were motivated by this discovery of gold and this gold rush as well. So their experience, it was better than the South, but they still face a lot of discrimination, prejudice, and lack of job opportunities. So better than the South, but still a lot of the same things that they were experiencing in the South as well. Chinese immigrants. So we talked about Chinese immigrants and the fact that they first came to the U.S. during the gold rush, but eventually began working on the railroad. So they sold suppliers to miners and saw some success. They faced discrimination and prejudice because of this. They worked really, really hard for a lot less money. But eventually the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, and this eliminated Chinese immigrants from coming into America. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about immigration. But they faced a lot of discrimination and prejudice and jealousy. The Donner Party. So this is an interesting group here. So George Donner, right here, started this group, and they left Missouri for California. James Reed was an organizing member. So George Donner started this whole thing, and then James Reed and his family, and then many other families, they all came together, and they were like, well, we're going to go together. They wanted to take a shortcut through the Great Salt Desert. So their experience, it was very lonely, and they were very poor, and it was not enough food. Winter came early, and they weren't prepared. So they resorted to cannibalism. So they would eat the flesh of the dead, because many of them perished in this harsh winter among starvation and things like that due to the lack of food. And only about half of the group actually made it to California. So today's assignment, push and pull factors. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up the worksheet that's linked, as well as in the Google Classroom. And it looks like this. So the homesteaders, we've got push factors and pull factors. Push factors are reason why you leave an area. Pull factors are reason why you come to a certain area. And so there's push and pull factors that are listed below, and you're just going to put them in the correct side of the table. So you can either copy and paste, or you can type into the document itself. So you just want to talk about what were push factors. So what were reasons they left their home? So these are going to be bad things that cause them to leave home. Pull factors are going to be good things that cause you to want to go to a certain place. So push factors are happening at home while pull factors are happening in the new place that you're choosing to move to.